Burhan from Turkey, because we haven't talked on the role of Turkey in the whole setup so far, and I think it's very necessary also, and there is a need also to explore a bit what is the new role of this new actor in the region coming up very strongly in the last years. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to speak about the Middle Eastern countries and Turkey at the same time, because I think just to confine my statement to Turkey would not be sufficient. I think the Middle Eastern countries are of very special importance. I think especially because of their population, which is largely Muslim. And when we speak about Middle Eastern countries, we mainly speak about countries with a majority of the population which is Muslim. So the question has to do with political Islam, with secular state, with secular society, and so on. Therefore, I think to solve this conflict is very important, is of extreme importance for world peace and also democratization in the whole world. Now, of course, these countries have some common characteristics and also serious differences. But they are all late developers economically and socially, and they all show serious freedom limitations and serious gender inequalities. Another problem, which is very common, is the excessive role of the army in politics. We can speak of a dilemma that is excessive role of the army and authoritarian ruling elite on one side, and the religious movements of different shades on the other. Especially the results of the Egypt presidential election have shown this fragmentation very seriously, that Mohamed Morsi has received 25% of the votes, who promises to impose Islamic Sharia law, and the second candidate, Ahmed Shafik, has received 24% of the votes, who was Mubarak's last prime minister. Now, this is a conflict which cannot be solved overnight, which cannot be solved in 1 year or two. How can this conflict, even this confrontation, be resolved? How can democratization in these countries be supported by the EU, or more correctly, by the progressive forces in Europe? A year ago, most of the populations, most of the people in the world were quite optimistic. Actually, they were in a euphoria. There was a wind of democracy, power to the people, victory of the social media, etc. These were the terms of the day. Today, a disillusion wind is blowing. Hopes have faded. Instability and uncertainty are the terms of the day, even chaos. Economic stagnation and divided societies and general pessimism. What can happen now? I can think we can speak about 4 different possibilities. A very optimistic one, a gradual transition towards democracy. A very pessimistic one, a military dictatorship. Another pessimistic one, an Islamic political regime. Those of us who are old enough remember '79 in Iran. Today, the Communist Party was in the same struggle against the Shah, and many leftists in the West thought at the end something good would come out of this movement, of this uprising. Nowadays, when you go to any university in Iran, you will see that the cafeterias for girls and boys are separate, and even the computer sections are separate for the boys and girls. So, an Islamic political regime is a danger. But at the same time, this wouldn't mean that military dictatorships are any better. So, election results have to be adhered to, have to be taken serious. For the worst scenario is chaos and instability continues, as in Syria. At this point, I would like to express that most of the population in Turkey is against a military intervention to Syria. We are completely against it. When I say we, I mean the majority of the people in Turkey. Now, what can become out of this process? We see the process is going through different ways in different countries, but I think Turkey has experienced the same dynamics, the same transition in a longer period in a peaceful way. And therefore, some of the Islamists in different countries are speaking about a model Turkey, rather, more correctly, a model of AKP, the ruling party in Turkey. Now, how the process, how the dynamics will continue depends on several factors. One of the factors is the relative powers of the political groups in specific countries. Relative is the important word here. What shade of the political Islamists are in power or active? Radicals or more moderates? Are there any liberal Democrats? Because in Turkey's case, liberal Democrats have, for a certain period, supported AKP, and now they have come to divide their positions. What is the strength and historical mission of the army in that specific country? And more important, economic indicators and determinants. Is there a modern capitalist class which is open to the world? What is the size of foreign trade, foreign direct investment, and what are the relations of the local national bourgeoisie with international firms and corporations? Finally, how strong are the trade unions? And so these are the factors which will determine the dynamics in different countries. Now, let me say a few words about Tunisia and Ghannouchi, for example. He speaks of moderate Islam, but at the same time, he's against secularism. He says, we are going to implement moderate Islam, therefore, we are not in need of secularism, which is contradictory, of course. And Ghannouchi is looking at AKP as a role model. Now, AKP experience in Turkey is very unique, and I don't think it is repeatable. It's not replicable, because AKP came at a time when, for the whole of the 1990s, the performance of the ruling parties was very negative, very insufficient, and AKP received the credit of a reaction which was actually supposed to be brought to the front by left-wing parties. But at that time, the left-wing parties in Turkey were very nationalistic, were very authoritarian, and were putting very much emphasis upon secularism, and they were excessively concentrating on this issue. So they were close to the positions of the army. Therefore, the backlash was a victory of AKP. What did the AKP do? The AKP has been very successful. They have won 3 elections in a row, and in the last election they received 50% of the votes, which is not to be underestimated. And so Ghannouchi is right in taking AKP as a model because of the success, at least. But what has the AKP done? This is the critical point for Turkey. In the first period of 4 or 5 years, AKP has improved the relations with the EU. The main question for AKP was demilitarization. And so AKP has moved the military to a position where it should be in a democracy. Unfortunately, the left-wing party at that stage did not cooperate with AKP as it should, and it didn't support AKP's moves against the army's role in the politics. And AKP was quite successful in economics, in certain areas, but the success story was based on the positive economic cycle in world economy and a rise in FDI and also a large privatization program in Turkey. And so, when we come to the second stage of AKP after 2005 or 6, now we start to see the conservative, culturally and politically conservative face of AKP. This is a warning point for all the countries in the Middle East. What happens now? AKP has stopped all negotiations with the EU and also the conservatives on the EU side have joined doing this with AKP. And there has been talk about accession fatigue for countries, and Turkey is suffering from this for many years. And I think on the European side, there are many countries and leaders to be criticized, but I'm going to withdraw my critiques on that specific point at this moment. What is happening with AKP? A very good example. In the past, until very recently, in senior high schools, we had a course which was called National Security, and this course was given by military people who wore their uniforms coming to that class. This wasn't taken very seriously by the pupils, but still, it was a sign of a military regime. AKP has rightly abolished this course, but on the other hand, it has brought its own agenda on the education area. Number one, the mandatory school was 8 years. AKP has divided that into 2 pieces, 4 plus 4, and for the second stage, it has opened a channel for religious schools. You would realize that a young person of 10 or 11 years of age is too early to raise or to bring up religious clergy people. Secondly, AKP has introduced an elective course which is called Muhammad the Prophet's Life. Now, this is the contradiction AKP has led Turkey to. And Ana Gomez has mentioned the abortion problem. And there are Putinization questions about the Tayyip Erdogan, the leader of the AKP. Rising authoritarianism, increasing conservatism, and putting pressure on the media, economic pressure and political pressure. I cannot go on this list of AKP's new attitude, and I want to conclude by referring to 2 reports about Turkey's relation with EU, which I find very useful, very impartial, very objective. One is written by Jan Marinus Wiersma and Daniel Tadic, Judith Tanchos for FEPS and the European Forum, and it was outside yesterday. I would suggest those interested have a look at that report. Another report, which is again quite objective, was produced by the Center for European Reform in London by Katinka Barish. These reports put most of the views which I share to a great extent. And this is the end of my talk. As I said, I would like to withhold my other critiques about the attitudes on the European side, and some of them are actually quite important. One final modest proposal: we need to increase the dialogue and cooperation between the progressive forces. This is the only way out. This is true for all Middle Eastern countries and also Turkey. Thank you.